Hello, everyone, and welcome to How Hackers Steal Payment Cards, a webinar by LMG Security. My name is Derek Rowe, and I'm your moderator for today. Our presenter for the webinar today is Sherry Davidoff. Sherry Davidoff is the CEO of LMG Security and author of Data Breaches. As a recognized expert in cybersecurity and data breach response, Sherry has been called a security badass by the New York Times. Her professional experiences are featured in the book Breaking and Entering: The Extraordinary Story of a Hacker Called Alien. Sherry is a GIAC certified forensic examiner and penetration tester, receiving her degree in computer science and electrical engineering from MIT. Her latest book, Ransomware Response, will be published early next year. Sherry, I'm passing you control of the webinar.
Thank you so much, Derek. I appreciate it. Today, we're going to talk about how hackers steal payment information. And good news, there are holiday specials even on the dark web. Check out this cool example. And thank you so much to Derek for researching the dark web and finding this one just a couple days ago. There's a super offer on credit card numbers, 2-for-1 deal, only $40. And this is common. The dark web has blossomed into a mature e-commerce environment, and you actually see holiday deals just like that you do on other things in the legitimate e-commerce landscape. So today we're going to dig into this and talk about why hackers are after payment card numbers, how they actually steal them. We're going to start off by focusing on consumer attacks because often they're trying to steal payment information from consumers using phishing, password theft, malware, and more. And then we'll talk about merchant attacks. So for those of you that are in organizations where credit card numbers are stored or processed, you probably have to grapple with PCI compliance. You have to worry about these payment card numbers getting stolen. You also have to worry about e-commerce sites getting hacked potentially. So we'll talk about all these things from physical card skimming to network breaches to e-commerce hacks and also e-skimming. And finally, we're going to talk along the way about how you can reduce your risk. If you have any questions, feel free to drop me a line during the presentation in the Q&A channel, or you can also message me on LinkedIn afterwards. So with that, why are hackers after payment card information? It seems like an obvious question. In the United States, credit and debit card numbers make up 40% and about 34% of payments respectively. And those numbers are roughly holding steady. What's interesting is PayPal is third. PayPal, the use of PayPal for shopping is at almost 14% this year, and we've been seeing that creeping up. Now that's wildly different compared with the rest of the world, where recent studies are showing that PayPal is used for as much as 40% of all purchases. So in the United States, we have more of an emphasis on credit and debit card numbers. Around the rest of the world, we're seeing different types of payments being adopted. So what are hackers doing when they steal payment information? Well, first of all, they might try to use it themselves. So they might purchase goods or transfer funds. And typically this is a group effort. You've probably heard of money mules. They have all kinds of tricks and scams that they use to get other people to help them move money so that there's less risk of them getting caught. Because obviously if you just take a stolen credit card number and you go to a store and you use it over and over again, chances are pretty good that at some point they're going to be on to you. So there's a whole ecosystem that simply revolves around cashing out and around monetizing some of this payment information. The third thing they can do, though, is sell it. And that's a big change over the past couple of decades. The dark web has, again, blossomed, and we are now seeing payment card numbers routinely getting bought and sold. In fact, the e-commerce shops on the dark web are so heavily flooded with credit and debit card information that often it's cheaper than buying a Gmail account. So supply and demand, you know, that price goes down when there's a lot of payment card hacking. In order to fully understand how payment card theft works and how our response to it has evolved over the years, it's really important to understand some of the greatest credit card thefts in history. And all of this begins with Albert Gonzalez. Albert Gonzalez was a criminal mastermind. And in July of 2003, he was standing at an ATM cashing out. It was hard to tell it was him because he was wearing a long black wig and he was standing there around midnight just feeding cards into an ATM, entering the pins and getting the money out. And an undercover cop saw this woman late at night just standing at an ATM for a really long time and thought, huh, that's weird. And he decided to see what was going on. Now, why was Albert there around midnight? Well, what happens to your debit card around midnight? Obviously, you can withdraw cash at any time during the day, and then you hit a limit. And at the time, that limit reset at midnight. And so he would enter all these card numbers or enter all these cards into the system, withdraw the cash, and then after the stroke of midnight, he would do the same thing again and be able to get double a payment because of the timing. So when the undercover cop found him, he had 70 fake debit cards on his person, and the cop knew that he was onto something important. Turns out he didn't know how important it would be. But Albert Gonzalez was part of a site called Shadow Crew. Shadow Crew was, the dark web wasn't really in existence at the time. Shadow Crew was actually just shadowcrew.com. And what they did was, number one, they were a forum, a community of criminals around the world that focused on carding for a large part of what they did, and fraud and identity theft, things like that. So they would steal card numbers, sell them on Shadow Crew to other vendors. There were tutorials for cashing out, all kinds of stuff. And Albert, who was also known as Kumbajani, was an administrator on the site and had really worked his way up into their ranks. Before that, he was part of a group called the Keebler Elves that would deface websites, and he was known as Soup Nazi. But he very quickly realized that he could make a lot of money once he broke into a website by stealing card numbers, and so he got into that line of work. Now, it turned out after Albert got caught, he was introduced to the Secret Service, who gave him a deal. They had been trying to track down carders for quite some time and didn't really know exactly how to go about it. So they offered him a bargain. If he helped them take down Shadow Crew, then he himself wouldn't go to jail. And he did. Shadow Crew, there was a big sting operation. Shadow Crew was taken down, and Albert was free. He ended up working for the Secret Service. He took a full-time job with them and moved back down to Miami, where he lived with his parents for a while. That was not the end of the Albert Gonzalez story, nor was it the end of credit card fraud. We'll get back to Albert in a little bit, but let's talk about where credit card theft is today. So here's another image. Again, thanks so much, Derek, for helping to grab these. This is an image from the dark web. Credit and debit cards with a $6,000 balance are going for $600. So typically, the sale price of a card when it's being sold on the dark web is for some percentage of the known balance. Here you can see 10% of the balance, $600. And there's a really nice product description, live credit and debit cards selling for cheap versus other vendors, etc. So they're advertising, trying to peddle their wares. This is an example of a card auto shop. So auto shops are places where you can, they're like, automated e-commerce sites. You can just scroll through credit card numbers, find the ones you want, and check out. In the United States, over 355,000 credit and debit card numbers were being bought and sold on just this one website alone. Here's another website, Brian's Club, for those of you that are into information security. This is named after Brian Krebs, the investigative journalist that helped to expose a lot of card thieves. So Brian's Club is a large automated card theft and sale shop. Check out what you can do here. You can search for a particular bank, by country, by state, by city. Searching for card numbers based out of a particular region can actually help criminals more effectively engage in theft, because if they're in that region, then it's less likely to flag any fraud detection. You can look for ones that have a PIN, that have track one data, that are refundable. So if it doesn't work, you can get your money back, all kinds of stuff. Now here's what happens when you start browsing for payment card numbers. Ooh, they're on sale, such a deal, right? Again, supply and demand. But you can browse for card numbers, see the different kinds, whether they're Visa, MasterCard, you name it, what bank they're from. It has the region, not always, what dump it was part of. So that means like what group of card numbers was stolen. And then you just click the shopping cart and check out with your goods. Yeah. In addition to credit and debit cards, we of course also see PayPal information that's getting bought and sold on the dark web. Remember, PayPal makes up 14% of payments in the United States, up to 40% around the world. That's a recent statistic that I saw. So here's an example of PayPal accounts being sold on the dark web. Here's one with a guaranteed $2,500 balance. And then here's another one. PayPal can't stop this. I love this because PayPal is always working to reduce fraud, of course, to detect unauthorized logins or payments that seem suspicious. And this is one where the criminals are always kind of playing that arms race, and they're often trying to shop around and to sell information that goes with the PayPal account that will help you get through any fraud detection checks. So if we go back to this page, take a peek at what you get upon purchase in the bottom right. You get the login and password and the email. You also get an IP address, the country that this person is in, the address, the user agent string of the browser. All of this information is useful for fraudsters who want to make it look like they're you, that their web browser is your web browser, and that they're coming from your country. There are ways that they can proxy to make it look like they're coming from the right place and hopefully evade that fraud detection. So gift cards are also on our list. Check this out. Gift cards are about 4% store gift cards. And here's a gift card being hawked on the dark web, 550 bucks. Again, probably a percentage of that balance. All right, so we see that all these card numbers are being bought and sold. How do criminals actually get them? Well, the top ways are through phishing, password theft, and malware. And one of the reasons why this is so effective is because more and more consumers are shopping online. In 2021, we're predicted to see over 2.14 billion people shopping online. That is an enormous percentage of the world. So 2 billion online shoppers, that's 2 billion people who you could potentially phish or grab their passwords or infect with malware. Let's take a peek at some common phishing trends. So here's an Amazon Prime deal, and Amazon deals around this, or this is one from the summer, but we do see a lot of holiday Amazon phishing emails as well. You've probably seen them yourself. And when you see these, often the criminals are cloning the website that goes along with it. So if you see an Amazon email, they might try to clone the Amazon website, and there's tools that are bought and sold on the dark web that make it really easy for them to do that. And they know what they're doing. They're cloning it to steal your username and password. So you click on a link in a phishing email, oh, that looks like it's really Amazon. I'm going to type my username and password in, and voila, it's actually a phishing site. Here's another one. This is a delivery from just this week. Ooh, my delivery should have already arrived. They know that a lot of people are expecting packages at this time of year, especially given the increase in online shopping. So you frequently see shipping scams. Here's one that says your delivery is scheduled for tomorrow, and there will be multiple places to click, maybe update address or find my package. Sometimes there's delivery exceptions. Your package wasn't delivered, and then the user goes, oh no, and clicks on it. And they can either get themselves infected with malware or phished, their password phished. We're also seeing an increase in holiday-themed SMS phishing. That means text messages. So here are a couple examples that were shared by Proofpoint. Hello, Deborah, your package has been delivered. Oh, great, I want to see that. Sometimes you'll have delivery exceptions. Here's another one, and they've taken the time to show the website that goes along with it, which is why I really like this example. Notice your early bird Black Friday order will arrive tomorrow. Don't click that link. If you do click that link, here's what you're going to see on the right. Hey, there's a package waiting. It looks like there's some error. There's a tracking number that does not look long enough to be a tracking number, and you click Find My Package. If you were to click through these screens, chances are they would start asking you for information that's useful to them, not just your name, your phone number, all that stuff that they may already have, but they might ask you to type in your password for a website or your credit or debit card number, so we can look up your tracking information, whatever it is that they're trying to do. All right, so again, we talked about the fact that often users are shopping, or consumers are shopping through e-commerce sites, and as a result, we're seeing more and more hackers targeting e-commerce sites as well. So here's a hacker advertising his skills, breaking into eBay and Amazon. He says, or they say, we are the wizard, a very experienced company specializing in all aspects of the dark web. They offer personal and friendly service. So, and they have really great feedback. Look at all that great feedback. They're advertising getting into eBay and Amazon. Here's another one that's shopping around Walmart money card accounts. So again, store specific cards they can get, and also check out what comes with it. Not just the holder's name, but their social security number, their address, and date of birth. And again, so many stores are requiring these things in order to get access or to transfer money, and in order for criminals to cash out, that these are starting to be sold as a package. It's not that hard to match people up. So keep in mind, retailers or other stores that are asking for this extra information, that information is already out there. Security by trivia is just not a successful approach, unfortunately. Okay, I had to put this one in here, the Chase scam page. I love the word scam page. It's kind of like a rampage, but with a scam attached to it. I don't know. So what they're doing here is they're creating a Chase, what looks like a Chase website. It's a scam. And check out what their features are. Lasts longer than any scam page, so it's not going to be flagged or taken down. Super works fine. It works with both mobile and PC. That's great because many people only have a mobile device. Collects full info from the victim, supports scaffolding, grabs form automatically, all kinds of stuff, and you can just buy it and check out. This is often paired with a phishing email. So the one on the left here is that Chase email that you might pair with a Chase scam page. So the customer clicks on www.chase.com, doesn't actually go to www.chase.com. Another example of one of these is Wells Fargo. I really like this example because this gets people, especially this time of year when they're trying to shop for packages and stuff. Unfortunately, you're overdrawn. Oh my gosh, I bought too much. You click the link and you get hacked. So these are just a few examples of common phishing schemes that we are seeing right now. Many of these are coming from KnowBe4, by the way. KnowBe4, which is a training platform, also includes the option to report phishing emails. And so they're tracking on those phishing emails that are current in real time and then creating templates from those. So really great system, and it's a great way to see what's trending right now. All right, so often I get the question, what should I do if my information was stolen? Well, first of all, don't panic. I definitely don't worry too much if my payment card information is stolen, partly because consumers have a $0 liability. If you're talking about a business card, that's another issue, and you definitely want to follow up on that pretty well. You want to follow up on both of them, but there's greater risk if you're losing business debit or credit card numbers. But regardless, it's not like your medical information is out the door. You can change your card number. So notify your card issuer right away. That will help to limit your liability. Document all the actions you take so you can illustrate that you've been taking the proper steps to protect yourself. And then you might consider either changing passwords, monitor your credit report, or place a freeze on your credit. Now, stealing your credit card number wouldn't allow somebody else to open a new card, but often when your credit card number gets stolen, criminals have also stolen other information as well, as we've seen. They may also have your social security number. They may also have your password. So to be safe, if you notice credit card fraud or debit card fraud, you might just want to change some other things as well until you understand exactly where that came from. All right, again, if there's any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat. In the meantime, let's just touch very briefly on malware. Now, we had a whole presentation earlier this year on how malware works. If you missed it, check it out on YouTube. But in the meantime, I'll show you just a couple examples. Here is keystroke loggers that are being sold on the dark web. In this case, it's 129 bucks. And these will just capture any passwords or card numbers as you type them in, whether you're typing it into a browser, a mail client, a chat client, whatever. So here's, I don't know if you guys have heard Emotet is back. Emotet is a very widespread type of, well, it's really a remote access Trojan and password stealer. It can also steal really any kind of information that the hacker wants it to steal. It gets full control over your computer. And at LMG, we infected a computer in the lab with Emotet, and one of the things we found was that it automatically grabbed information out that was stored in Chrome. So if you store your billing info, if you store saved credit card information in Chrome, as soon as your computer's infected, it automatically gets stolen right out of the browser. And we watched it go out in the network traffic. That's what you're seeing right here. It just went out plain text. So keep in mind that this can happen very quickly. It can happen automatically. Once you find out your computer's infected, you might want to keep an eye on your payment cards because that's one of the first things that hackers will try to monetize. Okay. We've talked about how hackers go after consumers in order to capture payment information or gain access to accounts like PayPal and eBay. Let's flip over to talking about merchants. Again, if you have questions, feel free to shout them out. Okay, when we talk about merchants, we're not just talking about retailers. Often people think, oh, payment card information, that's a problem for restaurants and it's a problem for stores on the street. However, many other kinds of organizations count as merchants. That includes municipalities that take payment card information, nonprofits, healthcare, education, schools, Any organization that stores or processes payment card information has to worry about hackers going after it, and many also have to be PCI compliant as well. We'll get into that in just a few minutes. So many kinds of organizations have to think about this. One of the most traditional ways that criminals steal your payment card numbers is through physical skimming. So here's an example that was shared by the FBI of physical card skimming. This is an ATM, and criminals have installed, number one, a hidden camera. They can use that to see your PIN often as it's typed on the keyboard. It can help to have background information as well about who this could be. You can also see number two is the skimmer itself. So it's going to grab information from your mag stripe as you slide it into this ATM. And then number three, you can also see a keypad overlay. So again, this will track exactly what number has been typed. Often the criminals can connect over Bluetooth. So once this is put into place, they may have no reason to physically touch this system again until the skimmer is found. How can you detect a skimmer? Well, number one, check for cracks, loose parts, things like that. Does something not seem right? If you notice something odd, don't use that machine. I know a lot of times when you use an ATM, you're in a rush, you're just trying to go from place to place. However, it can cause you a lot more headache in the long run. So if you notice anything odd, just take a moment and use a different ATM. All right, skimmers are still a problem today, and they're even a problem for major organizations. Costco just last month had to disclose a data breach because they found a credit card skimmer at one of their warehouses. So even if you only had a small number of cards stolen, you may still need to disclose a data breach and still end up in the headlines. Wow. So here are some criminals on the dark web that sell credit cards and also help to sell some of the gear used to steal it. I love this one, and I actually found this last December, but I think they're still very unique in explaining the situation that led them into crime. The group is called Noble Cards, and they explain why they're there. Because we are same like you. We start life in poor city, and for this we must very hard work. We must decided eat nothing or eat normally by stolen credit cards, just like us. Next, we bought First Skimmer and start production of cloned cards. Now we are big group, produce and ship 50 cards every day. So what they do is they are going to take the stolen card numbers and actually make physical cards with them and ship them for you. And you can see some examples of their skimmers on the screen right there. If you haven't ever played with the magnetic stripe skimmer, by the way, it's pretty fun. I recommend it. They're very cheap. They only cost like 10 bucks. Here's an ATM skimmer for sale, $14.99. I don't recommend you use this for evil, just if you're interested in security, you know, for scientific purposes. It's also kind of cool to show kids. I've showed my kids what's on a magnetic stripe card. I also have a book. It's a coffee table book about the history of the ATM. And the first banks that came out with magnetic stripe cards, they thought it was very secure. They actually hired a company to pen test it, and the company could not figure out that there was information stored on the card. And it didn't quite look the same as they look today, but I think it's interesting, you know, how effective security through obscurity was for a long time. But of course, today magnetic stripe readers are very common. This is on the dark web being sold as a skimmer cloner, but again, it can be used for just research and scientific purposes. All right, we're about to talk about the impact of card numbers on merchants and of card theft on merchants and on everyone else in the payment card ecosystem. And before we do that, I want to just set the stage and talk about the real reason that payment card theft is so prevalent. And the reason is that the system is fundamentally broken, right? You have a long number that you have to keep really secret because it's the keys to the kingdom. But in order to use it, you have to give it away to people. Sometimes you give it away to dozens of people a day, but they all have to keep that really secret. So in essence, the system is broken. If you think about it, this is just fundamentally an extremely insecure system. So if you think that it's a challenge to keep payment card information secure, if you're wondering why it's so hard, if you're wondering why it's such a big problem, it's because it is not designed for security, and we have far better systems in place today, which we're going to talk about. You don't have to use static payment card numbers anymore, and we all need to be moving away from it. All right, So what happens when payment card numbers get stolen? In order to understand that, let's first talk about how a normal transaction occurs. You have a consumer, let's say Derek is making a payment, and I'm the merchant. I'm selling you, Derek, some goods or services. I'm going to sell you a big screen TV. So Derek buys a big screen TV from me, and his issuing bank, there's a couple other players involved. There's the issuing bank, that's Derek's bank, the cardholder's bank. And then there's the acquiring bank. That's the bank that the merchant works with in order to be able to take payment cards. And then there's the card brands themselves. There's the whole card scheme where transaction and authentication information flows through the network. Okay, so those are all the key players. So when Derek presents his card and I go to run it, I'm the merchant, here's what happens. Number one, the acquiring bank will give me the money less a service fee, so I have to pay for that service. Then they'll work it out with the issuing bank. There will be an interchange fee and a funds transfer from the issuing bank to the acquiring bank. And then finally, the cardholder's account will be debited. So that's how the money flows. The cardholder pays the issuing bank sends the money to the acquirer gives the money to the merchant, and there's little bits of money spread throughout as fees so that each of the other parties makes some money. Okay, so who loses in the event of payment card fraud? Let's say it's not actually Derek. Let's say evil Derek has stolen Derek's card and evil Derek is buying a big screen TV. Derek finds out about this and notifies his bank. Now, he probably has a $0 liability if he was pretty quick to find out about that and report it. And what that means is that consumers ultimately do not have to pay for fraud. Legally, I'm pretty sure there's a $50 limit, but in reality, card brands don't want consumers to worry about using their card. If they did, they wouldn't use cards as often. So instead, most of the time, consumers have a $0 liability if you report it right away and if you follow up. So the issuing bank, Derek's bank, is the first one that has to pay for the fraud because they're going to put the money back into his account. And then the issuer has a choice. They can talk to the acquirer and claim that there's been fraud and try to get the money back that way. Or if it's a bigger issue, let's say lots of cardholders have gotten hacked, then the other parties in the system may choose to go after the merchant by filing a lawsuit. And we've seen that in many of these major breaches like TJ Maxx, Target, and other ones. Often the merchant is also out the goods, at least the goods, and sometimes they can be on the hook for paying for the cost of fraud as well. Now, this doesn't have to be the case. Like today, the cardholder tends to have that $0 liability, but they do have time and effort in following up on fraud. The issuing bank may have a possible permanent loss depending on the specific situation. The merchant may also have a possible loss. The acquirer at a minimum will have to spend time and effort and money dealing with chargebacks. But it doesn't necessarily have to be this way. Again, remember, this is a fundamentally broken system. It's not any one party's fault. And so the process of figuring out who's on the hook for fraud has really evolved over the past 20 years. So in addition to the financial loss, we also have to think about who gets the blame. And a study from a couple of years ago of consumers showed that when there's fraud on a card, the organization that gets blamed the most is the store or the merchant where my information was stolen. I think that's very interesting. So 43% of the time, consumers are blaming the store, and then 31% of the time, they're blaming the bank. And it may or may not be the fault of any of those organizations. Again, really, we're dealing with a system that is fundamentally broken. So around the turn of the century, we started to see more and more card fraud, and that led to some rumblings of legislation. People were starting to demand that the US government act, and Congress, there was talk within Congress of passing some laws, however, about regulating the payment card industry. However, the payment card industry stepped up and said, no, you don't have to regulate us. We will regulate ourselves. We will regulate our own security. And they did. They formed the Payment Card Industry Security Standards Council, PCI-SSC. And the members of that council were American Express, Discover, JCB, MasterCard, and Visa International. And the effect of the Payment Card Industry Security Standard Council was to push responsibility for payment card security down to the merchants and payment processors and other organizations that handle card numbers, not to the consumers, not to the card brands themselves, but primarily to the merchants and to the payment processors that we're handling, and to other parties within the system. So that, as a security professional that watched this happen, I thought it was a pretty interesting development, not necessarily fair to all of those merchants, because many merchants, think about your small businesses in particular, are just not in a position to fully secure a network. I like to think of sensitive data as hazardous material like uranium, and payment card numbers are uranium, and we're basically passing that around to small businesses and many other organizations that just may not have the resources to handle it. So anyway, here's a look at the payment card data security, the payment card industry data security standard, PCI DSS. This was formed by the card brands, and merchants are contractually obligated to adhere to that. If merchants do not adhere to the PCI DSS, they may get fined in some situations, or they may be liable for breaches. We'll see a couple examples of that in a few minutes. Now, again, it's really important to remember that PCI DSS is just a Band-Aid on a broken system. We're taking this long secret number and we're spreading it around to everybody. It's just not going to be secure. And so now we have to tell everybody, you need to invest in keeping this long secret number very, very safe, because the system is inherently insecure. So that's where we've been for the last 15 years or so. And the good news is that we're starting to move on to other types of payment systems that are more secure, but we still have many, many payment card numbers out there. A few other things to understand: PCI DSS is not a law. It is not a law. It is a contractual obligation. So the merchant is contractually obligated in their arrangement with the acquiring bank to adhere to this standard. It's also important to understand that the PCI Security Standards Council says they are a global open body. They also say they are a non-profit. This is straight from their LinkedIn page. It's been this way for years and years. They are not a nonprofit. They are a for-profit organization that is owned and run by American Express, Discover, JCB, MasterCard, and Visa. And again, remember, the system is fundamentally broken. It would take a global investment to fix it, and we are seeing that today. But in the meantime, the effect of the payment card industry data security standard is to push that liability down to other parties in the system. So if you ever struggle with payment card security, you are not alone. Many organizations do, and we'll get more into the PCI standards in just a few minutes. Okay. So let's talk about some of the other ways that criminals get your card numbers and the effect that this has had on our whole payment ecosystem. So in order to do that, we are going to get back to Albert Gonzalez, the greatest carding criminal of all time. So Albert Gonzalez was down in Miami working as a Secret Service agent, and his job was to help bust criminals that were stealing and selling payment cards, and he was pretty good at his job. Turns out that he was also bored. He didn't really like working 9 to 5. It didn't really challenge him technically. So he and his buddies on the side started war driving. They started driving around in cars and looking for open wireless networks. They also started researching point of sale systems and vulnerabilities in point of sale systems. They grabbed point of sale systems off the counters of retailers to understand the vulnerabilities, because they wanted to see if they could steal card numbers out of them. This was a huge leap forward, technologically speaking, at the time. One of the things they did was they were able to worm their way into the TJ Maxx stores. They found a weak wireless network. They broke in and they were able to actually get into TJX headquarters in Framingham, Massachusetts through the network. And they ended up stealing at least 94 million card numbers. And again, remember, this is in Albert's spare time while his day job is working as a Secret Service agent. So by night, he and his friends are stealing payment card information. They've gotten into TJX. They've, at the time, it was the biggest hack ever reported, and no one knew who did it. So the Secret Service was trying to figure this out, of course, and it turns out that what Albert's been doing behind the scenes is he's selling those card numbers to a counterpart of his in Eastern Europe, Maxim Yastremski. And Yastremski is then using those card numbers, he's selling them as cards in nightclubs all over Eastern Europe. And the Secret Service, they have this international law enforcement operation, and they end up busting Yastrzemski. The way that Albert makes his money, by the way, is Yastrzemski is mailing him cash. So he's getting packages of cash. He's living at his parents' house. After he was busted, they found over $1 million of cash buried in his backyard. Part of the reason he was at his parents' house was because he said, he told the reporter that it was easier for him to launder money through his parents' home equity line while he was living at their house. So convenient. Anyway, so TJ Maxx was believed to be the largest hack ever. There was this international law enforcement bust. They found Maxim Yastrzemski. They started doing forensics on his laptop, and they were trying to figure out where he was getting these card numbers. They discovered a conversation between him and Soup Nazi. And these Secret Service agents recognized the name. They recognized that this was Albert Gonzalez's old hacker name from back when he was at the Keebler Elves. And they realized that the mastermind behind this crime was right there in their midst. All right, so another thing Albert did before he was actually busted, he and his buddies were bored. So again, it kind of all comes down to that. He's a problem. So in addition to hacking into TJ Maxx, he was finding that, okay, they have card numbers, but a lot of them are old, they're not fresh. How could they get more card numbers fresher, faster? They decided to go after a payment processor, the arteries of the payment card system. And they found a SQL injection vulnerability in the website of Heartland Payment Processor. They broke in and they were able to siphon out hundreds of millions of credit card numbers. Heartland was a payment processor for over 250,000 businesses around the United States. They had billions of transactions every year, and Albert and his colleagues managed to get right into the middle of that. It turned out that Heartland, like all other payment processors, was not encrypting the card numbers in transit as they went across their network. And this was fairly early in the days of cybersecurity, still around 2008 or so. So Albert and his colleagues were able to just sniff the network and grab card numbers as they traveled across the wire as they were being processed. Now, again, he was busted. And as he was busted, and after he was busted, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Some of the outcomes of this were not just confined to the impacts on Albert, however. There were a lot of impacts on other organizations involved, such as TJ Maxx. So TJX got sued, and they ended up settling with Visa and MasterCard for $40.9 million and $24 million, respectively. And that money was divided up throughout the issuing banks as well. By no means did it cover the full loss, but it was certainly a start. And one of the things that was used against TJX in court was the fact that they were not PCI compliant. According to court filings, they violated 9 of the 12 PCI controls. So all of a sudden, even though PCI is not a law, even though it's a contractual obligation, it's becoming more and more important when it comes to establishing liability after payment card fraud. The other thing that happened was that apparently, according to the card brands, Heartland was retroactively non-compliant. So Heartland was compliant with PCI at the time that they were hacked. But Visa came out and said, we've never seen anyone who was breached that was PCI compliant. And this whole concept of retroactively non-compliant rippled through the security community. It really made everybody question, well, what's the point of PCI if you can get certified ahead of time and then after the fact they can tell you that you're retroactively non-compliant? So a lot of security practitioners back in 2009 started really questioning that. Heartland had one of the best responses to being hacked that I have ever seen. The CEO, Bob Carr, really took what happened to Hart and did a full analysis. And what they found was that, number one, encryption was key. They weren't using encryption throughout the network, and that wasn't unusual. The card brands at the time did not even support encryption as a part of the communication between the payment processor and their networks, at least according to Heartland's reports. So what Heartland did was they created a secure payment processing system. They actually developed a whole new point of sale system. It had end-to-end encryption built in, so the card number was encrypted from the point that it entered the system all the way through the card brand's network. It also used tokenization and the chip card. So all that was built into one point of sale system, and they offered a warranty that said that they would cover any costs in the event that a merchant was breached while they were using this secure payment system. So really a hugely forward, a little bit ahead of its time. We're going to get into some of these technologies here momentarily. Let's take a peek. All right, so the first thing that this new point of sale system involved was EMV, the chip. You've probably heard a lot about the chip over the past few years. One of the reasons for that, I'm going to jump ahead real quick, is that many retailers have been compromised because of mega breaches over the past decade. Target, for example, had 40 million card numbers stolen. Sally Beauty, PF Chang's, UPS had a data breach. Home Depot had a data breach, 56 million card numbers. And the big thing that happened after all these retailers were breached was the card brands came out and said, hey, all you merchants, you need to be using the chip. You need to support EMV. That will solve our problems. And that was pretty weird because the chip does not actually prevent that from happening. So let's learn about the chip, what it is capable of, what it is not capable of. The chip is a little smart chip on your credit or debit card, and it is much harder to read than a mag stripe. So it really does a great job foiling physical attacks. It's harder to skim. You might have a really easy time skimming a magnetic stripe card and a hard time skimming a card that only has a chip. Of course, the problem is most of our cards have a chip and a magnetic stripe, right? So that is another problem that we see. Anyway, the chip is very difficult to replicate. It has the ability to have a unique cryptogram for every transaction. It's also difficult to replace. So if a card number gets stolen, it's going to be at least $2 per card, whereas replacing a magnetic stripe card is less than $1 per card. So if you do have fraud and you need to replace cards, it's much more expensive to replace these chip cards. Again, EMV does not help once the card number is read. So once you have the card number in a point of sale system, EMV isn't going to help you because that card number may still be in the memory of the point of sale system, or if there's malware in the point of sale system, it can pull out that card number. And Brian Krebs pointed that out after the Target breach occurred. So he said the Target breach by the numbers. I love this article. 0 is the number of customer cards that chip and pin enabled terminals would have been able to stop the bad guys from stealing had Target put the technology in place prior to the breach. All right, that's interesting. So if the chip doesn't solve these mega breaches, you know, when criminals are hacking networks, then how come the card brands suddenly required it? They actually didn't require end-to-end encryption. They didn't require tokenization or any other technology. They required the chip. Okay, part of that is because the chip is patented. The chip is owned by a company called EMV Co. LLC, which in turn is owned by American Express, Visa, MasterCard, JCB, UnionPay, and Discover. So this was a technology developed by the card brands, and they could make money off of deploying it. Now, the chip isn't bad. Again, it helps to reduce the risk of physical attacks. It's certainly a good tool to have in your security arsenal, but is it the one thing you needed to require? No. It's not. And in fact, today, the way it's deployed, it's certainly not as secure as the deployment methods that we see in Europe and other areas that rolled it out back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So the chip is fairly old technology. It was very useful for the time. Today, we're seeing these network-based attacks, and it's just really not as effective against those. However, the card brands did require it. They used their contractual relationships in order to pressure merchants to adopt it. And nowadays, it has almost 100% adoption in parts of Europe. It has 72% adoption, almost 73% adoption throughout the United States. So the vast majority of merchants in the United States have adopted the chip and have the ability to read it. As this is happening, however, the criminals are just going where it's easy, right? So, okay, it's harder to do in-person fraud. They're just going to move online. And that's exactly what we've been seeing. So as card not present fraud, or as it becomes more difficult to engage in card present fraud, card not present fraud goes up. That's just the reality. And we've also seen data breach distribution changing as a result. So this is from the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. You can see that point of sale fraud is going down, 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 and web application hacking is on the rise. We're going to get into that in just a couple minutes. Okay, so what technology is effective in these cases? Well, end-to-end encryption is really effective. I wish the card brands had required end-to-end encryption because it does reduce the risk of theft, especially if merchants get hacked. So in end-to-end encryption, it's exactly what it sounds like. The data is encrypted from the point that the card is given to the merchant all the way throughout the network. And some of your modern point of sale vendors, some of the biggest vendors of all, are supporting this, which has really helped to reduce the number of breaches we've seen. Square is a really great example of that. And here's an example of success. Barnes & Noble was hacked. I know that doesn't sound like success, but right here's the line that made me so happy I could cry. It said, firstly, to reassure you, there's been no compromise of payment card or other such financial data. These are encrypted and tokenized and not accessible. Yes, merchants are actually doing the right thing, encrypting card numbers using tokenization, and it's working. What is tokenization? Tokenization is when we replace any sensitive data you may have with some kind of substitute that has no intrinsic value. So for example, instead of using your actual card number, you might use a replacement card number. Now you might be scratching your head and saying, how does it work? Well, first of all, it's built in automatically into many payment platforms. So into Square or into a wallet on a mobile wallet, you might actually have tokenized versions of your cards, and the application developers are working with the back-end systems like Apple Pay is a great example to assign you a token. You can even have a different number for each retailer so that if that number is stolen from that retailer, say, it can't be used anywhere else. And it may also be associated with a specific device, so you can only use that particular card number while you're using your mobile phone. Those are just a couple of ways that tokenization can be really effective and can really limit fraud. Here are the top mobile payment platforms. Number one is Apple Pay. 43.9 million people in the US use Apple Pay on a regular basis. That's great, and it makes sense because it's built into iPhones. Number two, that was Starbucks. 31 million people use Starbucks Pay. I use both of these systems, and I think this is fascinating that Starbucks is number two. All right, we are coffee fiends here. Number three is Google Pay. 25 million people use Google Pay, and then 16.3 million people use Samsung Pay. So contactless payments have really gone up and up and up since the pandemic began. And part of that is because consumers are worried about the cleanliness of paying with credit and debit cards. I can tell you before the pandemic, if I wanted to pay using a contactless payment, a lot of times, at least here in Montana, I got blank stares like, oh, we don't support that. Now everyone's like, oh yeah, you don't want to touch that system. We totally get it. So that's kind of nice. So we've seen mobile payment usage go up and up and up. And of course, the good thing is it's not just about germs. It also helps to increase your security because most mobile payment systems have tokenization built in. That means when you scan your phone at the counter, when you're touching it to the point of sale system, the merchant never gets your real card number. And that means, number one, it can't be stolen from the merchant, and they don't have to worry about securing it. So that's a win-win for the consumer and the merchant. It means the merchant has less risk, maybe it has less money, needs to invest less in security because they have less sensitive data, all kinds of stuff like that. So again, really a win-win to use contactless payments. Even though Apple Pay and other contactless payment methods are quite secure, criminals will still try to monetize this. So Derek, thank you so much for scouring the dark web for Apple Pay theft. He only found one example, and this is Apple Pay carding method, where the criminal is trying to sell something that we don't fully understand. Apple Pay carding method, there's no reviews for this criminal. It seems really sketchy. So remember, card theft is up. PayPal credential theft is up. However, theft and sale of anything relating to stealing information out of Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, Google Pay, we're not really seeing that. And part of it is because it's really hard to do. This is secure technology. We also have single-use accounts. Most major card brands offer that. So again, if you want to use a single-use account for a particular payment online, let's say you have to use a card number, you can do that and you don't have to worry about your main card number getting stolen. All right, finally, let's touch on e-commerce hacks. We've talked about physical card skimming, network breaches. We've talked about PCI and some of the issues surrounding that. Let's talk about what happens when websites get hacked. We're seeing that more and more. So criminals aren't just going for your network, they also want your website. Neiman Marcus had to reveal a data breach to 4.6 million customers this year. They were actually hacked in 2020, revealed it this year because their website got hacked and information about credit cards and gift cards was potentially accessible. Here's another example of the egg-free cake box. This is one from this year, an e-commerce skimming example, where they had to disclose a data breach after criminals had hacked their website and stolen card numbers. So unfortunately, this is not uncommon. It's actually very common. We've been seeing a rash of e-skimming attacks, and the groups of attackers behind these are often known as mage cart. You'll hear that term used almost synonymously with the concept of e-skimming. So the idea here is that criminals hack your website. They will inject JavaScript that just skims off the payment information and sends it out to a third-party website. Now, the types of websites that are hacked are primarily shopping websites. You can see that in the chart here. Also, however, other types of websites can be affected. So even though the percentage of breaches is much smaller, really any industry website that takes payment cards is potentially at risk of e-skimming. You see government, continuing education colleges, real estate, art and culture, corporate marketing, you name it, any kind of industry can be affected. And what they'll do is they'll use lexically similar domains. What does that mean? That is a fancy way of saying that they're going to use lookalike domains. So they inject this JavaScript that's designed to steal payment information, and much of the time they're sending it to a site that looks almost legitimate, cloudflareplus.com. That is similar to a legitimate domain, Cloudflare, but it's a little bit different. And the reason they're doing that is because that way, if somebody's looking at the code of the site or they're looking at the web traffic, it's just harder to spot. It doesn't really stick out like a sore thumb. Again, we're seeing defenders develop and roll out some really effective tools to prevent e-skimming. And Cloudflare is one example. So Cloudflare is a suite, they're a product that has a suite of tools to help do load balancing and to help protect websites. They created Page Shield, which is an early warning about malicious scripts that might be embedded in a web page. So we're seeing the criminals escalate. They've started putting backdoors first in images, and then more recently this year, there was a rash of backdoors in the favicon of a web page. So they're putting web shells in there, meaning they can remotely get into systems, but it looks like it's actually in the icon related to the website. Speaking of which, we need to be watching out for web shells. Microsoft did a study and has released information about the number of web shells that they found this year compared to last year. A web shell is just a way that criminals will remotely get and maintain backdoor access into a server. If it's accessible via the web, they can connect via a web shell. And this year, web shells are up. You can see in late 2020, early 2021, there was a spike in web shells that's much higher than what we were seeing the year prior. So watch out for web shells. Criminals are using these to get backdoor access to a website, and from there they can modify the code, capture passwords, capture payment information, you name it. So how do we defend against this? Make sure you're patching your e-commerce platforms. If there's a widespread vulnerability, then criminals can take advantage of that and use that to hack sometimes thousands of sites at once. And actually, just to back up for 1 second, we saw that with Cardbleed, where there's a very popular platform, Magento, that had a vulnerability, and hackers were able to get into 2,000 different e-commerce sites at once because of this one vulnerability. So make sure your e-commerce platforms are patched, make sure you're monitoring them carefully, leverage those third-party tools that help you protect your site, and then make sure that you test any web applications you have regularly, especially if you are processing payment card information. All right, finally, I want to wrap up with Click to Pay. Click to Pay is a huge success. Again, for 20 years, we've been struggling with payment card information. We've had the chip, which helps to prevent card present fraud. It helps to prevent your card number from being stolen because of the different architecture. However, that's never really helped us online. People are still typing in their card numbers online, saving them in e-commerce sites and protecting them with a password. And we all know how secure passwords are and how much consumers like two-factor authentication. Enter Click to Pay. Click-to-Pay is a global collaboration supported by the major card brands, and it allows for passwordless checkout, device-based authentication, and tokenization even when you're shopping online. So what it does is it will authenticate a user, it will enroll their device, so that device is going to be recognized going forward, and from that point on, consumers can check out without a password. It will also do tokenization so that the merchants you're shopping with do not ever need to get your payment card in your actual payment card number. Instead, they just get like a one-time token that's not useful for future payments. So again, really helpful. And it's also possible to set up auto pay with this as well. But Click-to-Pay is going to dramatically reduce the risk associated with payment card fraud. So you can see all the major card brands now support it. Check it out. If you take any kind of payment card information online, do yourself a favor and your customers a favor and support Click-to-Pay, because it will reduce your risk of payment card fraud, and it will also be an easier experience with your customers. Always nice when those go hand to hand, and better security is also better usability. Also, by the way, contactless payments are much quicker and faster than even magnetic stripe payments in a lot of cases. That's one of the reasons consumers have been embracing them. So right now, finally, 2021, we're starting to see security and usability considerations getting lined up, which is what we need to see. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that Click-to-Pay has an owner. Click-to-Pay is owned and maintained by EMVCo LLC. Yep, they're back. And they're owned by American Express, Visa, MasterCard, JCB, Union Pay, and Discover. And honestly, that's a good thing, because in order to change the system, we needed the major card brands to work together and to globally roll this out. And that's exactly what we saw happen. So we had a system where you have a long secret number, it has to be kept really secret, but you have to give it away all the time. That's a broken system. And we needed a global coordinated investment in order to move away from that. And that is exactly what we have today. So adopt Click-to-Pay for use online if you can. Adopt contactless payments for your in-person shopping experiences. And if you're in an organization that takes payment cards, encourage your consumers to use these technologies as well. So how can we protect ourselves? Use encryption. Use tokenization, implement these e-commerce security measures, and finally, embrace new technology. Contactless payments and Click-to-Pay are getting rid of the underlying problem. They're getting rid of payment card numbers to begin with, and so we all should be embracing those. It will reduce our risk and improve our security. All right, we're at the end of the year. We've had 12 monthly webinars from top threats of 2021. Then we went into a series on how encryption works, how the dark web works, and then we were able to show you how exactly malware steals your data and then how criminals monetize that on the dark web. Finally, from there we went into some talks on how to manage your security program, so how to optimize it, new trends in cyber incident response and forensics, proactive monitoring and logging over the summer. In August, we did our summer hacking update after all the big research came out from Black Hat and DEF CON. Then in September, we talked about planning your cybersecurity budget for 2022. We wanted to help everybody get ahead of that. In October, we talked about beyond passwords, two-factor authentication, biometrics, and more. November, we talked about email hacking and financial fraud. And finally, this month, 'tis the season, we talked about how hackers steal payment card data. So if you missed any of them, go back and check them out. They are all on YouTube. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Nice to see some familiar faces month after month. And stay tuned for our next webinar, Top Threats of 2022. With that, feel free to drop me a line on LinkedIn. Oh, I do want to mention, if you are interested in the Albert Gonzalez story, I have a whole podcast about that. Malicious Life had me on as a guest, and we did a 3-part series. They did a fabulous job, so feel free to check that out. With that, I think we have 1 or 2 minutes for questions.
Thank you for the great information, Sherry. We did have actually a few questions that came from our audience during the presentation. The first question reads, my team is getting fake texts from me or other executives in my company asking to buy gift cards for the holidays. What's our best approach to this?
Yeah, it's very common for criminals to be soliciting employees and trying to get them to buy gift cards around this season or transfer money. They might pretend to be the CEO or the CFO. So first of all, make sure that your team is prepared for that. Give them a heads up and let them know that you will never text them or email them and tell them to buy gift cards in an emergency. Really, communication is key here.
Thanks, Sherry. We got one more. What do I do if I think I clicked on a bad link?
Yeah, if you think you clicked on a link in a phishing email, then don't wait. Actually, let somebody know, notify them. If it's at work, then you'll want to let IT know right away, and then they can come and make sure your computer is clean and help you out.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sherry. Once again, this is Derek Rowe with LMG Security. We'd like to thank everyone who attended